It's a privilege to be here. It's a little bit intimidating when you look out and you see people like Michael Youssef and John Fuller and Dennis Rainey and all the pastors who are here. Usually I work behind a curtain with a producer in my ear to tell me when I've screwed up, and with pre-programmed audio, and I am not a preacher nor a theologian, so it's an intimidating audience. But I think you will join me in agreeing that when someone changes your whole speech 24 hours before, you're mad at that person. That person is Bob Lepine. Where are you, Bob? I'm mad at you. Because yesterday we were sitting with Family Life Radio and Dennis and Bob, and at the end of this, Salem was meeting with them. Just a random comment. We talk show hosts tend to talk a lot, but I was listening. He said, "By the way, Hugh, I just want to thank you for representing the evangelicals on the stage of the presidential debates. You didn't embarrass us. We're very proud of you." And it's a very humbling comment, actually. I hadn't thought of myself as representing the evangelicals. It's a little bit scary in retrospect. But how did that end up happening is actually a story of what Salem does. And I wanted to tell you, it's a journey for me, but it's a journey for Salem that Edward just went through. And it begins actually, it's the integration of the sacred with the secular. And it's, I think, something that's relevant to every single person in the room, because nobody here ended up here by accident. Everyone has a journey that followed a number of specific steps over a number of particular years and decision points. I have always said the 8 most important words in this world are, have you ever considered, and I know a guy. And if you're open, when anyone says, have you ever considered, or I know a guy or a gal, what they're saying to you is, opportunity has come for you, please listen. And usually the voice of the Lord is involved in that, usually if you can discern. I started out on this journey in 1990 after working for the great Ronald Reagan in his White House in an office across the hall from the speechwriters and sharing a suite with a guy who went on to become the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts. And I came back to California and was not doing anything except building the Nixon Library when the phone rang. And it was KFI Radio, George Oliva. Some of you may know George from the secular world. Would you like to do a weekend radio show for KFI AM 640, 50,000 watts? I said, that sounds like beats working, I'll do that. Have you ever considered doing talk radio? So I went on to talk radio, and I did that for 4 or 5 years, and because my first shift was Sunday night between 9 and midnight, nobody cared what I did. 0 people listened. The program, there was no Phil Boyce looking over my shoulder in 1990. So I took Mere Christianity, which I knew had been delivered as a series of radio lectures, and I read them over the air at night between 9 and midnight. Now, 50,000 watts from LA carries. We even got picked up across the eastern side of the Mississippi, people would call me from. And because of that, a producer by the name of Martin Burns, who's gone to his reward, sadly, he's a young man, fell to his death in a tragic hiking accident. He was listening one night, and he called me up, and Edward referenced this radio show, this television show, Life and Times in LA. And he said, have you ever considered doing TV? And I said, that beats working too, I'll do that. And so I did that for a few years when Russ Hout, who's sitting over here, heard that and said, would you come down to the Dallas SRN meeting where I met Stu and Edward for the first time, just to hang around. Salem never recruits in a hurry. They take a 3 or 4 year curve to recruit you into Salem. And so I go down and I kind of meet people, and then Warren Duffy calls up, and many of you know Warren. Would you guest host for me? And I agreed to guest host. Have you ever considered guest hosting Christian talk radio Monday through Friday? So I'd sit in for Warren, and I picked up Anthony Ochoa and Dwayne Patterson, teammates who have been with me ever since that time, until finally KABC calls up because they hear me doing Christian FM talk radio, and KABC's a big morning talker in Los Angeles. I've never done Monday through Friday radio. I'm a lawyer. I don't know how to do radio. And KABC says, have you ever considered filling in for John and Ken? Now, Edward doesn't remember this, but he heard me fill in for John and Ken. And he said, you know, Hout has been talking about you for a long time. Why don't you come up to Ventura? Edward can be direct. And so in a 5-minute lunch, he asked me, would you like to do a syndicated talk show for Salem? And I said, of course I would. That beats working. And so in July of 2000, I went onto the Salem Radio Network. Now, what has happened since then, I can only say, is actually a God thing. I didn't know how to do talk radio because you have to sell. And so I came from PBS, where you don't have to sell, you have to beg. And I was very good at begging. I could beg with anybody. You know, you do the who played Lou Holtz? Not Lou Holtz, but Lou Grant. Edward, you know, the socialist. Thank you. He and I would do Pledge every year together. And so I learned how to beg very well. But Greg Anderson, who's retired now, had to come down and teach me how to sell. I had to be open to learning how to sell. And after that, I had to be learning how to integrate Salem's basic message, which Stu and Edward have always said, redemptive radio in the secular space. So you've got to be good for secular people. Now, this was 1999, 2000, I began this journey, and it's 17 years later, and we have gone from a post-Christian world to a way post-Christian world. Way, way, way post-Christian world. All along the way, Salem has been repositioning itself to do what Edward talked about, to be able to speak into a culture which is increasingly not only indifferent to, but hostile to belief. So much so that this April 19th, the most important free exercise clause case in 30 years we held before the Supreme Court. Edward mentioned I teach a little con law at Fowler School of Law at Chapman University. It's called Trinity Lutheran Church versus Pauley. And it involves all of the Blaine amendments and all of the free exercise challenges. And I thought 4 months ago we didn't have a prayer. We'd always have a prayer, but I didn't think we had a prayer with that court. And so Trinity Lutheran will be argued on April 19th. April 19th. If things go well, Judge Neil Gorsuch will be confirmed as Justice Neil Gorsuch on April the 7th, if things go very well. And so the most important free exercise of religion case will be decided after Donald Trump's first nominee to the Supreme Court is confirmed. That's important. Now, why did that happen? I have a few Trump tattoos. The president and I have a very unusual relationship. He's done 15 of my interviews on my radio show. I did the 4 debates. But because of the way that Edward and Stu and Dave Centrella and Dave Evans and Tom Chaddop and Phil Boyce built this program, when CNN went looking for a partner, they had to have a partner because Reince Priebus said, we're not going to do these debates anymore. You're going to have to do these debates with someone from our team on there. And so they called Salem, and they had a bench of a number of great people. And I'm very honored that when Edward and Stu and Dave and Phil and Dave sat down and figured out, they called me and said, would you do this? And when you walk into the CNN room, and they're my friends, I like these people. I have been interviewing them for years. Jake Tapper and Wolf Blitzer and Dana Bash, Chuck Todd, all of my secular friends, I've been interviewing them for years because we have a secular platform which we do faith messages on, but which we invite secular people into. Because like the early church now, we have to earn an invitation into the culture. We have to get people to invite us to come and speak to us now. We used to own the culture. In fact, in 1952, Justice Robert Jackson, in a very famous Supreme Court case, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, referred without a footnote to interpreting Pharaoh's dreams and the difficulty that Joseph incurred there doing. He didn't footnote that. Each year I teach that case and I ask my law students, who here knows? Who here knows what he's referring to? Only the Mormons know when I bring up Joseph and Pharaoh's dreams. They haven't got a common reference. In 1952, a Supreme Court justice would simply write that in their opinion. It would be understood. That is how far we have gone. So when CNN needed a partner, they looked around the entire conservative universe and they called Edward and Stu and Dave and Dave. And they said, have you got anyone? They said, we'll send you Hewitt. And not only did they accept me, they accepted me like the long-lost relative who had just shown up and asked for money. Because they knew I was there and I had to be there. But at the first meeting, up at the Reagan Library debate, I sat over in the corner very quietly, realizing it's a long-term play. This is not a short-term play, because Salem is a long-term play. Very quietly, making my points, not being upset when I was allocated a question and a half in the first debate. People wanted me to be mad at CNN. Edward said, don't be mad at CNN. We're in the room. Second debate, 3 questions. Been in the room another 20 hours with these folks. Third debate, he's not crazy. The Christian guy from Salem isn't out of his mind. 4 questions. And then on the 4th debate, it was just like I belonged to CNN for my entire life. And in the pre-debate room, which is a sealed room, you can't go in because you can't really let anyone know. You have to be fair. And we were very fair from the very beginning. I did 170 interviews with would-be presidential candidates. Eric McTaxis did scores of them. Dennis Prager did them. Mike Gallagher did them. Michael Medved did them. Larry Elder did them. We all were as fair could be to every single person. And that was by virtue of the front office saying, we will not take a dog in this fight. We will be fair. So we could say that, but we got down to 4 people on the stage in Miami, the last debate that occurred. In the last debate, Senator Rubio, president, now president, then candidate Trump, Senator Cruz, and Governor Kasich. And I was able to ask, because I had earned the credibility, because Salem had built the platform, because we'd been at this for 17 years, Senator Cruz, do you trust Mr. Trump to make good appointments on religious liberty? And Senator Cruz said, maybe, maybe not, you can trust me. And Donald Trump said, I absolutely will stick to the list that I gave you of 21 people, and they are all fine on religious liberty. So on the question most important to broadcasters in this space, freedom of religion and freedom to proclaim the word, Salem had built over that 40-year period the opportunity for someone that it had trained over 17 years to ask a question central to the existence of everyone in this room. Now that is the long game, and it was well played, Edward. Now how do you do that? In the secular space, you have to smuggle in Christianity, right? So it's like Bible smuggling, only without the danger, okay? So it's not like dangerous. But if you're doing, as Edward said, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's 15 hours, it's 60 hours a week. And in those 60 hours a week, you've got 4 segments an hour, so you've got a lot of segments. And Phil Boyce is a genius programmer, and Dave Santrella knows what he's doing, and Stu and Edward have been around, and they have ideas. And one of the things I learned early on is listen very closely when the boss has ideas, but you smuggle people in. So Edward didn't mind when I did a 3-hour interview with Bishop N.T. Wright. 3-hour interview on secular radio with Bishop N.T. Wright. Never been done before. It was riveting radio, by the way. Our secular friends who don't know the gospel got a big dose of it. And when I bring on Eric to talk about his wonderful bestseller, Bonhoeffer, people listen and they tune in. Last week I had in Archbishop Hugh of Philadelphia, so I get the Catholics to tune in. Philadelphia is 26% Catholic. I've had Stu Epperson Jr. talking about the last words of Christ and the first words of Christ. I've had on pretty much everyone in this room in one way or another, at some time or another over 17 years with one purpose in mind, to smuggle in the Christian gospel into a secular setting, because Edward's right. If 60% are Christians, 40% aren't. So the obligation of Salem and a talk show host like me and all of our hosts, I really do believe this, is not just to deliver great news talk product, because if it doesn't attract an audience, it can't be effective, but to make sure that that fragrance of the gospel is there. Because if the word goes forth, as we know from Isaiah 55, it does not come back without product, right? If it goes out, it does not come back without product. So I want to tell you 2 things about President Trump, and I want to ask you 5 things to consider and 1 warning. 2 things I want to tell you about President Trump. He is the most interesting, best radio interview in the world. Without question, I've been doing this long. I've done 10,000 interviews, not including callers, 10,000 interviews since 1990. The most interesting interview in the world is Donald J. Trump. Why is that? 100% authentic, 100% unpredictable. And therefore, you can't take your ears or eyes off of him. After the dinner tonight, I will run down to a hallway to sit down for MSNBC, and I will predict he will give a great speech tonight, and afterwards I will defend what he has to say. That's my missionary work, by the way. I do MSNBC. And so I should ask you for money for that, really. I should do that for MSNBC. But they're good people. But I want to make sure. He's going to give a great speech tonight. Second thing about Donald Trump, no matter what anyone tells you, he is not a racist, he is not a bigot, he is not an anti-Semite, he is not an Islamophobe. He is not. Donald Trump is a developer. And Edward mentioned that I'm a lawyer. I've represented the largest developers in America since getting out of the University of Michigan Law School in 1983 and getting out of the government in 1989. The biggest ones. Developers believe in getting projects done. They have a critical path. They are who they need to be with whom they are at the time they are so that they can get their project done. So he's a builder. And if you understand him that way, you will understand there isn't really a single bone in his body that's got any kind of hate in it. But he is in a war with the media because he does represent the deconstruction of the administrative state, which we are, I think, all in agreement ought to happen. What do I want to tell you, the 5 requests? The first request is obvious. If you've got a radio station, I think you should be carrying my show. It's just a little self-interested plug there. But also Eric Metaxas' show if you're a Christian broadcaster, because Eric smuggles the other way in. Eric smuggles worldview into the Christian worldview of people who may not want to know much about the world. So if you aren't carrying Eric's show right now, it is our best reverse strategy for people who aren't living enough in the world. Not of it, not becoming seduced by it, but getting enough of a message. So one way or the other, whether it's Prager or Gallagher or myself or Michael Medved or Larry Elder, or if you're a Christian teaching and talk station but you're not in the Salem Network, think about adding Eric or me. I might offend some of your listeners, but not many. Number two, we have a news product that Edward mentioned in passing. And our news product is on, how many stations? 3,000 stations? About 3,000 stations of worldview impacted news. That is an incredible thing when every other major news media is produced. Believe me, I love these people. They're my friends. I do meet the press once a month. I fly back there, and once in a while I'll meet a believer in the green room, but most of the time it's a pretty secular place. And so if you produce the news completely by people who don't believe in the gospel, it's going to reflect that they don't believe in the gospel. And that's not because they've got an agenda. It's not like a plot to screw the Christians. It's just that the pagans are making the news. And so if the pagans are making the news, you're going to get a pagan worldview when it comes to the news. If you want to influence that, you turn around and you put more people in view of a culturally produced worldview, and that's SRN News. So to those of you who can recommend and to those of you who can carry, it's a terrific, terrific news product. Third, and I'm not just shining on the boss. I don't have to do that anymore with Edward and Stu. We kind of get along after 17 years. I don't have to shine them on. You got to manage companies and ministries like they have with a very long view. Remember, I didn't know how to do a thing when I started doing talk radio in 2000. I could not sell a thing. And they could have easily said, that was a nice try, you're gone. Instead, they taught me how to sell. Need a mortgage? 888-888-1172. Call my friends right now. I could do that. I can do it from memory, relieffactor.com. I'll do it for you right now. I can sell. But you have to have a long view, and you have to build a platform up, and you have to develop talent. And I think that if there's anything, you ever do a seminar here, Jerry, I would get Edward and Stu and have them teach you how to build a company with a 40-year view, not a quarterly results view. I know that's a luxury for some people, but it's really been done the right way. Fourth, part of that, hire people like I've talked about. The Salem people, it's like going to a family reunion. They have all been there a lot longer than I have. Not all of them. Phil's relatively new. Eric's relatively new. 17 years, I get up to the middle table. I'm out of the kitchen. I'm not at the kiddies table, but I'm at the middle table because people come and stay with good organizations. When I found out that Dennis and Bob have been doing this for 40 years, I was also impressed. I know Focus has been doing it for 40 years. Nothing lasts in this culture for 40 years. Nothing. But you hope that at 40 years from now that they've all adapted and grown in the same way that Salem has. Fourth, news is happening very fast. When I sit down with Phil Boyce, we go over the research. And our audience wants breaking news every single news break again and again and again and again. What's happening right now? We can't get anything wrong. Our credibility is this fragile in our space when we're Christians and we're in the secular space. All of us have got to be careful to be right. We cannot go after anyone wrongly. And it's just a caution to me more than to anyone, and Eric understands this. If we're broadcasting and we're saying something, we cannot be wrong. We can't make a single false accusation in the years ahead because it will break us. It will come back against us. Finally, we need to treat our opponents in the media not like the Pharisees, but like the woman at the well. All right? The Pharisees are probably in this room, right? It could be me. People who are already in it and of it and understanding it. But in the secular media, there are a lot of people that we treat pretty badly. And we say terrible things about, and we shouldn't. Yesterday I had Sean talking to you. Sean is the nicest man in broadcast media, bar none, period. You know who is the nicest man in government right now? The nicest man in government. The Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, is the nicest man in government right now. He really is. And when I tell you that someone shares your worldview and he said he's a conservative, he's a Christian, a conservative, a Republican in that order, he's not fooling around. And if you've ever seen him interact with young people, eyes on them, all attention given to them, that's who we have to be. We got to be like Mike Pence is in a room when he's locked on you. That's my 5 suggestions. I want to leave with one caution. We think we won. because, as was just said by Barry, it was a miracle. We won. 4 months ago, I thought originalism was dead and the First Amendment was gone, and we won. But that's a false relief, because our real enemies are not here in this country. We have opponents here. We have people that we debate. We have a crazy man running North Korea with nuclear weapons. We have a marauding group of Islamist supremacists, and I don't just mean ISIS, I mean in Iran, where they will have a nuke. We have a resurgent People's Republic of China, which is occasionally open to, but mostly hostile to the gospel. And they are surging out of Blue Water Navy and developing weapons that we can only imagine. And they're not the ones who deployed against our election the way Russia did, but they have much better tools in that regard. General Flynn told me that we have 8,000 full-time employees in the United States government working on cybersecurity. The People's Republic of China has 800,000 people involved in the cybersecurity network, both official and unofficial. We have people across the globe, as some of the ministries in this room know, being persecuted, really persecuted for their faith, and we have enemies abroad. So our enemies are not at home. We have opponents at home. We have antagonists at home, but they are not our enemies, and we live in very fragile times. So I appreciate everything you do every single day in every one of your ministries. I'm here to help, as is Salem, for every single person here, and I've never been prouder than to address the NAB. Thank you very much.